find Jesus in real lives. And we stopped at the story in chapter 8 about a Roman centurion who pleaded with Jesus to heal someone he cared about. And while the crowd might not have approved of him helping a man that represented Rome, Jesus praised his faith and signaled to his followers not to let entrenched hostility define the future. Because then, as today, the basic question is, how do we resist injustice without becoming consumed by hatred? Well, today we are in chapter 9, and chapter 9 feels like one breathless story after another. And it's like Jesus can't get a break. So first, some friends carry a paralyzed man to Jesus on a cot. In Mark, he's lowered through the roof. So he heals the man with forgiveness, which immediately set the religious leaders on edge. Blasphemy. Only God can do that. What's he think he's doing? And this is the first instance in the Gospel of Matthew of opposition to Jesus by religious leaders. Now, in this case, they keep it quiet to themselves, but they can't hold their tongues when then Jesus walks up to a tax collector named Matthew and invites him to follow him. So first he helps a Roman centurion, and that's bad enough. But now he's calling a tax collector to be his disciple. This is a man whose job funds the very system of oppression. And then even worse, soon after, Jesus eats dinner at Matthew's house, surrounded by a crowd of other so-called sinners. And so they ask, well, why does your teacher eat with people like that? And notice they ask the disciples, not Jesus. But he answers, I'm after mercy, not religion. I'm here to invite outsiders, not coddle insiders. Just then a respected synagogue leader named Jairus came and interrupted him and begged for his daughter. And Jesus agrees to go help, but before he can even get to the house, a woman who has been bleeding for 12 years reaches out anonymously and touches his cloak and steps away. But Jesus refuses to let her disappear into the crowd. He stops her and he says, "Daughter," and she's healed. And finally they reach the little girl, and Jesus takes her hand and raises her up. And yet, almost immediately, two blind men begin shouting to him, pleading for mercy, and he's barely finished with them before another man is brought to him, seeking healing. Now, it might seem this is a collection of stories of miracles all stitched together, but what it's doing is painting a portrait of Jesus and the kingdom he is creating on earth as it is in heaven. Outsiders discovered in Jesus someone who would not overlook them, not avoid them, not condemn them. Someone proclaiming that there is no one beyond the reach of love, and that compassion matters more than gatekeeping. Even Roman centurions and tax collectors. Because as he said, I'm after mercy, not religion. I'm here to invite outsiders, not coddle insiders. Yuri Kochiyama might be a name you've never heard of before. I hadn't. She was born to Japanese immigrant parents in California in 1921, and she wrote in her memoir, I was very much an all-American girl. Girl Scouts, I taught arts and crafts and tennis at the YWCA, first aid at the Red Cross, and Sunday school at my local Presbyterian church. The day in 1941 that Pearl Harbor was bombed changed all our lives. Because before the war, I saw America with American eyes. What happened to us after Pearl Harbor made me see the world with entirely new ones. Japanese American eyes. Because almost immediately they became subjects of fear and suspicion. Her father was a successful fish merchant and a community leader. But he was arrested by the FBI because he was a community leader. And while detained, he became seriously ill and died not long after. So Yuri, her mother, and two brothers were imprisoned at the Santa Anita racetrack outside of Los Angeles for several months. They lived behind barbed wire in converted horse stalls, still reeking of manure. 18,000 families went through Santa Anita. Yuri's family was eventually sent to an internment camp in Arkansas, where they lived for 2 more years. Like 120,000 other Japanese Americans in camps across the country. And years later, she would speak of what it felt like, the humiliation of being reduced to the category of enemy or threat, or from this all-American girl to outsider. So after the war, she married an American soldier of Japanese descent who fought in Europe, while his own family lived behind barbed wire in the United States. And she often spoke of how Christianity shaped her early life, her early sense of service and compassion, human dignity. But after the trauma of internment, her worldview changed. Now, it wasn't abandoned, it was expanded. They moved to Harlem. And during the civil rights movement, she heard in the stories of others her own story. The experiences of black families facing housing discrimination and police violence and unequal schools. She heard her own story in the stories of Puerto Rican activists and political prisoners treated as threats instead of human beings. She heard it in the stories of struggle from people around the world trying to free themselves from colonial rule. And the more she listened, the more she felt compelled to help. She opened their apartment to activists. She sat with grieving families and listened to people that others ignored. And most of all, she showed up. People described her as being anywhere and everywhere it mattered. She also fought for justice for her own community, staying in the fight until Japanese Americans won reparations after those years of internment. For a woman who is described as having a tiny frame and a volcanic spirit, it was all interconnected. And Yuri was deeply influenced by Malcolm X and was by his side when he was assassinated in 1965. When others ran out of the room at the sound of gunfire, she ran to his side, and this photograph was in Life magazine, cradling his head as he died. Throughout her life, Yuri Kochiyama kept moving toward people the world labeled as dangerous or disposable, very much in the spirit of the stories in Matthew chapter 9 that she likely once taught in Sunday school. Stories where Jesus keeps running toward people others avoid, stopping for people others would condemn or blame or reduce to a sinner or a problem or a foreigner. And you know, once people are categories, religion can become more preoccupied with maintaining the categories, of maintaining purity and order, than mercy. But by healing them, Jesus was also restoring stigmatized and morally suspect people to communal life, belonging. For example, in the woman he called out to the bleeding woman, "Daughter," refusing to let her disappear into the crowd. And with that word, she becomes family. The paralyzed man is not an object of pity or debate. Jesus calls him son. He names a man who collected taxes for Rome disciple and eats with outsiders at his table. They become friends. And I want to say this isn't just about inclusion. This is a dangerous reordering toward the wrong people. Because somehow mercy itself became threatening. which I don't get. I mean, why is that a problem? Until I do it too. Isn't it easier to love humanity in the abstract than actual human beings who frustrate us and frighten us and exhaust us and disappoint us and challenge us? And these days, breathless and exhausted by one frightening headline after another, we can stop seeing people and only see problems. People I've judged before I know them. And I wonder, what might that say about discipleship in our day? And certainly it means protecting vulnerable people labeled dangerous. And as Jesus did over and over, remaining interruptible to people in need. But discipleship also might mean not allowing outrage media to define entire groups of people for us. Abandoning dehumanizing language for anyone. And refusing to give up too quickly on people who are difficult. And as Yuri once said, she was not driven by fearlessness or bravery, but by the simple conviction that showing up for people is always the right thing to do. And that's exactly where we find Jesus in real lives. I'm after mercy, he said, not religion. I'm here to invite outsiders, not coddle insiders. Now I want to say, this is not a denigration of religion. Jesus is not against community or spiritual practice. He's simply calling religion back to its deepest purpose, which is love. Including some simple stuff, so that none of us feel like outsiders ever. For example, when you enter the sanctuary or the fellowship hall, before you look around to find your friends, who's sitting alone? Who don't you know yet? It means looking around and noticing, now who haven't I seen here recently? And actually reaching out to say that? It means asking someone who needs prayer, can I bring you a casserole too? It means spending more time and energy as a church on things like feeding and housing and welcoming people than anything else. That's religion. Why? Because that's mercy.